Importance of supporting your community. High school sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association. There's just one place where students are students first, and athletics are played with purpose and perspective. That place is your local high school. High school sports offer more than the joy of competition. Studies show that student athletes in South Dakota are also likely to enjoy greater levels of achievement in other areas of their lives, including academics. High school sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
Everybody knows that high school sports generate suspense, excitement, and drama.
They also generate higher grade point averages, stronger work habits, and greater self-esteem.
Everybody knows that high school sports give us more value for our entertainment dollar.
They also give us leaders committed to strengthening communities right here in South Dakota. The true value of playing sports in school can't be measured in wins and losses or dollars and cents. Studies show that participation in sports, along with other extracurricular activities, is one of the best ways to teach leadership, cooperation, accountability, and other invaluable life skills. Don't just stand on the sidelines. Encourage the young people you know to get in the game. When you do, you'll be helping them get ahead in life. High school sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
The South Dakota High School Activities Association Board of Directors meeting is currently in recess or executive session. Please stand by for continued live audio coverage.
These days, the concept of value matters more than ever. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a better value than high school sports. Extracurricular activities, including sports, make up about 2% of the budget for a typical South Dakota high school. In return, participation in sports promotes citizenship and sportsmanship. Sports also instill a sense of community pride and teach lifelong lessons about cooperation and self-discipline. They encourage physical fitness. They produce community leaders. By offering so many benefits to the community for such a small percentage of a school's overall budget, it's easy to see why high school sports are one of the best bargains around. The real cost would come from not having them at all. High school sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
What do basketball, choir, drama club, and marching band all have in common? They're all high school activities that offer learning opportunities not necessarily found in the classroom. They take up just a fraction of a typical South Dakota high school's budget, and they go a long way to giving young people the tools they need to thrive. High school activities, they're more than extracurricular. They're extra important, too. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
It may not require a textbook, but it's filled with valuable lessons. It may not take place in a classroom, but it's an ideal environment for learning. It may not involve a diploma, but it can help prepare South Dakota's young people for life. It's high school sports. High school sports can play a critical role in a student's overall education. In fact, studies show that students that participate in high school sports are more likely to enjoy greater levels of achievement in their academic lives. If you think high school sports are only about competition, think again. Better yet, think about attending a high school sporting event in your community. You'll be amazed by what you see. High school sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
The South Dakota High School Activities Association Board of Directors meeting is currently in recess or executive session. Please stand by for continued live audio coverage.
Let's talk about the X's and O's of family entertainment. Every parent in South Dakota knows the importance of being able to draw up an activity that'll get you out of the house for a couple of hours. But it needs to be affordable. It needs to be family friendly. Above all, it needs to be fun. Now, let's talk about high school sports. Bang for your buck, school sports provide the perfect game plan for your family. You'll enjoy all of the drama and excitement competitive sports offer. You'll be supporting the future leaders of our community in a meaningful way. Best of all, you can take the entire family without breaking the bank. Heck, you won't even dent it. Now, enough chalk talk. Let's get out there and see what's playing at the high school in your community. School sports. Good for our kids, good for our community. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
I perform for our high school choir director, who taught me to breathe from the diaphragm and sing from the heart.
Speech, debate, theater, music, the performing arts teach valuable life lessons that typically aren't taught in the classroom. They help high school students learn leadership skills that prepare them to enjoy more satisfying, productive lives.
Hey, I've got a question for you. Who will you perform for?
This message presented by South Dakota High School Activities and the high school in your community. There's just one place where students are students first, and athletics are played with purpose and perspective. There's just one place where a team is more than a group of individual agendas. It's a catalyst for demonstrating the potential of the collaborative spirit. There's just one place where players, coaches, and fans experience the exhilaration that happens when an entire community rallies behind the school team. That place is your local high school. High school sports offer more than the joy of competition. Studies show that student athletes are more likely to enjoy greater levels of achievement in other areas of their lives, including academics. In addition, high school sports help young people in South Dakota develop the discipline and confidence they need to be leaders in life, even as they unite communities like nothing else. High school sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
The South Dakota High School Activities Association Board of Directors meeting is currently in recess or executive session. Please stand by for continued live audio coverage.
Who do I play for? I play high school basketball for every baller who ever played a pickup game on a driveway, playground, or alley, because we all share the same dream. I play for buzzer beaters, big-time boards, and burying rainmakers. I play high school basketball for the chance to put my hometown in South Dakota on the map by playing in a state championship.
Only 0.5% of all high school student athletes play basketball in college, but all 100% of them become adults. That's why playing basketball in their high school team is so important. High school athletes learn life lessons that help them grow up, lessons that can't be taught in the classroom and often aren't taught at home.
I play high school basketball because I love performing in front of a capacity crowd.
That is correct.
Hometown gym.
This message
I thought we were supposed to for these meetings. Nobody told me we weren't supposed to.
The South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
Got your shirt on. Jay.
I think that qualifies as long as I got the emblem.
They are role models. And educators. Their work requires a great deal of time.
All right, you look better than I do. I'll admit it.
Who are these unsung heroes?
Thanks, Coach.
Thanks, Coach.
The simple truth about education-based athletics in South Dakota is this: without a committed team of coaches and administrators, it just wouldn't be possible. School sports, they bring out the best in all of us. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
If an individual student athlete or team wins a high school state championship, it's an amazing thing. It's also just the icing on the cake. That's because young people in South Dakota who participate in education-based athletics are already winners. Studies show that win or lose, participation helps to impart skills they can use to enjoy greater success in other areas of their lives. School sports teach the benefits of teamwork, the value of self-motivation, and the importance of accountability. They also help to foster stronger work habits and higher levels of self-esteem. In other words, the true value of school sports can't be measured in terms of wins or losses. If an individual or team goes to state, it's an incredible accomplishment. But regardless of the outcome, today's student athletes are already destined to go far. School sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
The South Dakota High School Activities Association Board of Directors meeting is currently in recess or executive session. Please stand by for continued live audio coverage.
He worked out early, practiced late, and studied well into the night. The next day, he did it all over again.
She missed time hanging out and socializing with friends so she could make it on time to practices and games.
He became a top student and a confident leader, even as he helped his team win back-to-back conference titles.
She became a role model in her community, even as she led her team to an undefeated season.
And when they finished playing high school sports, what did they do next?
She graduated from college with honors and went to work for a successful company.
He attended graduate school and became a difference maker in his community.
Because that's what student athletes in South Dakota do. They use the skills they develop playing high school sports today
to do even bigger things in life tomorrow.
High school sports,
a winning part of a complete education.
This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
This is what matters. This is beyond X's and O's. This is the difference mutual respect makes. This is what character looks like. This is what defines us in South Dakota. This is sportsmanship. School sports, it's not the outcome that matters most, but the way the games are played. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
Are you ready to go once we get started here?
Yep. I perform for all the awesome composers whose music deserves to be
probably
heard.
Plug in here in just a minute.
I perform for all the stagehands who make sure I never miss a cue.
I perform for our high school choir director who taught me to breathe from the diaphragm and sing from the heart.
Speech.
Okay, so we're not muted?
You're not muted right now.
Okay, Mo, I think we're good to go.
We are at 10 a.m. here, and I'd like to call the special meeting to order. First item of business will be item number 1. Approve the agenda. Before we do that, do we have all our board members here so we have a quorum?
Call really quick just to make sure.
Thank you.
Jerry Rasmussen.
Here.
Brian Maher. Mark Murphy.
Here.
Dan Aker.
Here.
Craig Cassens.
Here.
Barry Mann. Randy Soma.
Here.
David Plantine.
Present.
Mo Rusick.
Here.
Brian Maher, are you on? Okay. We have 7 present right now. I know Brian was planning on attending. I'll shoot him a text here and make sure everything's working okay for him.
All right. First item of business is approve the agenda. Agenda was posted there, and everybody should have that in front of them if you've printed off or have it on your computer. So looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve. Jerry?
So moved.
Second, Cassens.
Any further discussion on the agenda? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion has been carried. Moving on to item number 2, public forum. Is there anybody wishing to address the board at this time in the public forum? Dan, did you have anybody that contacted you?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I'll note,
All right.
it looks like Brian and Barry
Moving
are
on.
both on right now. So just for the record.
All right, moving on to item number 3, consider 2020 summer contact guidance. I'll hand this over to Dr. Sordos and the staff, and if we have questions as a board or different things to put forth in the discussion, it's time to.
Okay, I got a text message that there's a lot of feedback when I talk. Are you getting feedback? Okay.
I'm not getting any feedback from you, Dan.
Okay. All right, we'll move on here. So, the summer contact recommendations here, this was an attempt to put out some guidance for our schools in terms of some recommendations for how they could approach their summer activities, be it sports or the fine arts. So this is based off of the NFHS document that was put out a few weeks ago. The NFHS Sports Medicine Advisory Committee had met and put out some guidance. We used that. It's also based on Governor Noem's Back to Normal plan from our Department of Health, and a lot of the references from the original NFHS document were based on the White House return opening up plan, and then the categories of sport were based on categories that the United States Olympic Committee is using. So just to run through it here, this guidance would be in effect from June 1st through July 31st. That is our summer contact period. That is only 1 day shorter than what it normally would be. On a normal year, this would have started May 31st. Right now, the July moratorium is still in place. So this guidance is in effect from June 1st to July 31st. It is subject to change based on conditions. We could put out some different recommendations if cases spike in our state and we need to adjust. The note here for these underlying principles is that, of course, the health and safety of students is the highest priority, but we also want to encourage schools to focus on the health of their coaches and advisors and their other staff, particularly those who are in vulnerable categories based on their age or underlying conditions. Due to the nature of the outbreak, there's going to be inequities based on geography. Half of our counties don't have a case yet. So it's likely that there's going to be differences on what some people can do at times during the summer. And typically, we wouldn't want that. We want to give the same opportunity to everybody. But due to the nature of the circumstances and how long kids have been away from activities, our goal here is to allow students to return to school-based athletics and activities in any and all situations where it can be done safely. So we also want to note that because the athletes have been inactive for so long, we really, really want to stress that care must be taken to recondition those athletes back to physical activity and not just go 100 miles an hour June 1st as soon as this starts. We also recommend the continued use of athletic training services as key health personnel in your programs. The guiding principle behind this is looking at a decreased potential exposure to respiratory droplets and the use of social distancing. So it's also the basis of stratification of risk by sport presented in the document. So we note on there that cloth face covering should be considered acceptable in all phases of this document. And then we define vulnerable individuals there. That's the CDC definition. Schools can look through that on their own. So it's essentially revolves around 3 phases and 3 different categories of sport. So our recommendation is that all schools start at phase 1 of the program and remain there for the 14 calendar days. And in keeping with Governor Noem's back to normal plan, if there's a downward or flat trajectory of documented cases within a 14-day period, schools then progress to phase 2, where they start a new 14-day period, and and then on to phase 3. So we also know that the schools should consistently monitor case numbers in their community and adjust those phases as necessary. In speaking with the Department of Health, they do not track 14-day numbers for any county. They're not doing that right now for any county except for Minnehaha. So schools are going to have to look at these numbers on their own, and it's going to be different everywhere. You know, if you go from 0 to 1, that's not necessarily a downward trajectory, but it also might be something where you look at it and say, okay, we went from 0 to 1, you know, we think we're still okay to continue doing this. Or if it's a small community and you go from 0 to 1 or 2, you might say, okay, we want to back off here and see where this goes within our community. There's also situations where we have districts or we have cooperatives where they span across multiple counties. So the school's going to have to make a decision on what numbers they look at and what they're tracking. I know they'll be doing some mass testing events in communities, in retirement homes, and in some other areas. And schools, if you get a spike and schools talk to the Department of Health and the Department of Health says, no, those were all those cases were people who were confined to a retirement home or a nursing home, they'll have to make decisions based on a lot of those factors. There's just no way for us as an association to be able to track and put an overall blanket guidance out here for 180 different schools. So this should be guidance, but schools are going to have to look at what's going on in their own communities and make some decisions, and they're free to do what they want with these recommendations. We don't have any penalties associated with this. We don't have any oversight or a structure assigned to us by Constitution specifically in this regard. So these are recommendations. So the three categories there would be low risk, moderate risk, and high risk, and you can read there the differences between those 3. Essentially, it's about the level of contact and how easily those activities are done with social distancing in mind. So the low risk categories would essentially be a lot of your individual events, such as golf, weight training, sideline cheer, individual running events, cross country, some of your throwing events, debate, oral and turf. Those are things that are largely individual in nature, and then they can be done with distancing fairly easily. And then you go up to moderate risk. Those are the sports that involve close, sustained contact with protective equipment in place that could reduce the likelihood of respiratory particle transmission, or it's intermittent close contact, or it's equipment that can't be cleaned between participants. So the examples there would be basketball, volleyball, soccer, gymnastics, tennis, high jump, long jump, pole vault, 7-on-7 football, one-act play. And we've had some questions on this as it regards to basketball. The NFHS addressed this as well. They put that in the moderate risk category because that's where the U.S. Olympic Committee placed it, based on their studies. So we are considering that to be a moderate risk sport, schools are free to consider it a high-risk sport if they feel more comfortable doing that. Okay, and then the note there is, you know, the sports like tennis or volleyball, gymnastics, some of those track events, those could be considered lower risk if you were cleaning up the equipment between the use by competitors, or if you were using masks with participants. You know, if you look at something like gymnastics, and if you're able to clean the equipment between kids using that equipment, then you could maybe consider that to be a lower risk activity. Okay. Then you have your high risk. That would be the sports and activities that involve close sustained contact between participants with the lack of significant protective barriers, with a high probability that respiratory particles will be transmitted. So with this would be football and wrestling, and then competitive cheer and dance with throws and the pyramids and things like that. A note here on the chorus, orchestra, and music. I did make a little tweak to this from what was sent out, just a clarification here that was requested by SDHSAA, or the Music Educators Association. Essentially, our association, our out-of-season rules don't pertain to music, okay? But we are still making some recommendations based on that. And it should be noted that these are recommendations and the school needs to make their own decisions. So the NFHS is investigating the extent of spread of respiratory droplets when people are singing.
Dr. Spartos?
Yes.
It is incredibly hard to hear you, at least on my end. Very warbled. Your communication is just not coming through clearly.
Okay.
And this just started, Dr. Scornis, over the last, I would say, 2 minutes or so.
Okay.
Agreed.
I would say maybe just try running through your laptop then for a while. Just
okay.
So you your laptop, I'll mute us in here and run it through there for right now.
Okay, is this any better?
I'm hearing Dr. Krogstrand clearly, so.
That's better.
Okay.
Yep, that's a lot better, Dan. Thank you.
We'll just have to run it through there for right now.
Okay. So I just went through the sport and risk activity categories there. You know, the last note was about chorus, orchestra, and music, and I did make some small tweaks to this based on feedback from SDMEA for the chorus and orchestra and music. And essentially, our rules don't apply to music. Our out-of-season rules do not apply to music. We don't really have any jurisdiction over what people do in the summer with music. But we are providing recommendations for schools to use as they consider that. And the NFHS right now is investigating the extent of the spread of respiratory droplets during singing and the playing of activity.
Okay, can you, we switched back to the in-house mics. Can you hear me clearly?
I hear that was on the stream out there. Anybody there?
Yeah, we can hear you, but we can hear him better before. Yeah, and Dr. Krogstrand's coming through loud and clear.
Maybe I'll speak up. Yeah, I'll move where I'm at here, maybe a bit closer to the microphones, and maybe that'll help. Is that any better?
Yes. Yeah, you were fine. You were fine before.
Yeah, but it wasn't, the audio wasn't coming through our live stream then, so we're trying to make it work on both ends here. Okay, so going on phase two, again, like I said, this pre-workout screening, there was a question about who consists of vulnerable individuals. There's a definition of that on the first page, the last bullet point under underlying principles. So, in terms of gatherings, the recommendation there is 10 people inside, up to 50 people outside. If you use locker rooms or any sort of meeting rooms, you need a minimum distance of 6 feet. Again, keep using those pods for the indoor workouts, and then to keep that social distancing of 6 feet. Okay. Facilities cleaning is the same as it was before. In terms of the physical activities, resume those practices for the lower sports, and then go into modified practices for the moderate risk sports or activities. And again, that's using drills, doing some drills with distancing in effect, passing drills, things like that. And when you get into those moderate sports, into this phase two, that's when you can start some passing drills, and you're cleaning the balls intermittently during the practices, and it's not as restricted to one ball per one kid. The rest of that is pretty similar in terms of the maximum lifts. You can start doing some max lifts, but you should use power cages, and the spotter should be at the end of each bar rather than standing behind the person. In terms of hydration, again, have the kids bring their own water bottles. Don't use the hydration stations. Phase three, the workout screening. That's the recommendation there is that you don't necessarily need to continue doing the pre-screening, except for, as you get down there, for your high-risk sports and activities, we would recommend for those practices, for those high-risk sports, that you continue screening participants and you continue keeping that record. We want you to still keep a record of who was present, and then those vulnerable individuals, they can start resuming what they do, but they should practice physical distancing and then minimizing exposure to social situations where that's not practical, unless there's precautionary measures observed or implemented like masks or something else. So, and in phase three, it would be gatherings of up to 50 individuals, indoors or outdoors, and when they're not directly participating in the workouts, they should be 6 feet apart, just to limit that exposure. In terms of the cleaning, it's the same facilities cleaning recommendations. The physical activity, that's when you can start your full practices for moderate risk sports, and then you're starting to build in up to that full practices for the high risk sports, but start with some modified practices, and then to continue those pre-practice screenings for those high risk sports as well. So again, don't share towels, pennies, clothing. They need to wear their own workout clothing, go home and wash them. Clean the equipment during practices, between practices. If you're using wrestling ear guards, football helmets, don't share them. And again, those maximum lifts, use a power cage and have the spotters at each end of the bar. So they have a recommendation that you could start using hydration stations in phase three but you need to clean them intermittently and after every practice. I would probably still recommend having kids bring their own water bottles, but that's a school decision. So the next page there is sort of just a chart that we put together going through each of the sports and each of the phases. So it's just sort of reiterating what we put there. The low risk sports, those are full practices with distancing for those sports and activities that are individual in nature. Moderate risk in phase 1, so a lot of focus on individual drills, individual use of equipment, team runs with staggered starts, weight training, and then in phase 2, you can start doing some modified drills. You can start doing exchanges of equipment balls, do some non-competitive drills, and then weight training, and then phase 3 would be full practice. For the high-risk sports, again, phase 1, you're working on individual drills, individual use of equipment. Phase 2, you could start, you'd still the focus would be on individual drills, but you could start working on some exchanges of equipment, exchange of balls, and then those team runs. And then phase 3 would be when you would start those modified drills with distancing, exchanges of those equipment, non-competitive drills. And the goal here for the high-risk sports, and essentially what we're working into there for the fall sports, would be football and competitive cheer and dance, and you're building into when the season would be starting. So, you know, if we're going to have activities in the fall, we're going to have to build up to that, and I think this is a good plan to get there. So if there are questions with this, I'm happy to answer them. Any clarifications? I've been, yesterday I was on the that Sanford COVID call and answered some questions that some people had. I've been invited to be part of the Department of Education work group that they're putting together for the return for the fall, and I think this is focused on summer. I think for our fall activities, what I'd like to do is to establish some sort of task force with our staff here, with some medical professionals who have been working with COVID. I know Dr. Cowles out of Sanford has done a lot. Burl Valentine, or Dr. Valentine, is a part of the NFHS Sports Medicine Advisory, and he's part of our advisory as well. I'd like to have him on that to start looking towards the fall and putting guidance out for that.
Really hard to hear
Dan, you're starting to break up and everything.
Okay. So what I was saying was, I the other day I had a chance to be on the COVID call. The last 2 weeks I've been on the COVID call that Sanford does with a lot of the school administrators around the state. Yesterday I was part of the Department of Education task force that's looking at opening back up in the fall. And in terms of us, my hope is to put some sort of task force together to meet here in June and into July with some experts. I know Dr. Cowles from Sanford has done a lot with COVID. Dr. Burl Valentine, he's on the NFHS Sports Medicine Advisory. He's on ours as well. And to get some people involved to look at activities for this fall as we come towards it, and put some guidance and recommendations out for that.
Okay, any questions from the board at this time? I know there's one or two questions on the chat.
Yep, I can answer some of those.
Hold up, right there, that's it.
Yep, so the question at the bottom there is the moving from phases. Again, we would recommend you use the governor's back to normal plan, where they talk about the 14-day downward trajectory of cases. We put that in there as a recommendation. Where you move from phase 1 to phase 2 would be a 14 days of downward trend, and then from phase 2 to phase 3 would be another 14-day downward trajectory of cases. Now, how you look at that locally is sort of on you. If you have a school district where you encompass multiple counties, how you do those. If there's mass testing events, how you and working. I would encourage you to work with the Department of Health. to get some information on that if you have spikes in your community to make decisions.
Quickly, Dan, Craig Cassins here. Just for people that are listening, the way I understand this is we're either going to get one or the other. We're either going to get the live stream clear, and then the Zoom is going to be poor, or the other way around. Any tech people out there can agree or disagree with me, but I believe that's the situation, correct?
Yeah, essentially our internet is slow in-house today, so trying to run this is just going to be a challenge regardless of what we do. So we're doing the best that we can to keep the live stream up, understanding that the quality may not be the best.
Okay. And then, John, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So if we're still open for questions, I got just a couple here. Again, this is a recommendation from the staff at this time, and each community might be a little bit different. For example, what they do in Lemon could be very different than what the situation is in Lennox. Am I correct in that statement to start with?
Yes.
All right, and then my next question, I guess, is pertaining to, like, let's say a high-risk activity like a football camp. The way it's set up, can a school have a traditional football camp in your mind anytime this summer?
To me, it would depend on how it's structured, how many communities are involved in it, what the activities are going to be that they're doing. If it's involving full contact, things like that, I would probably wait till later in the summer to do that as you get into phase 3 and work into that. But if it's with your own team and you're breaking them in, you're into phase 2 and you're breaking them into groups of 10 and you're doing a lot of 7-on-7 stuff, it could be possible.
Okay. Craig, as I read it and I understand it from I mean, obviously this is derived from the NatFed document and having those conversations with the medical professionals that Dan and I were in on, I think my take would be is it's ultimately a local decision that if you in your district where you don't have any cases in Fauquier County perhaps, and maybe a school in Perkins County also doesn't have any cases, and now you want to come together for a camp, then that might be something you could consider. I think the key component is back on the screen is that it's modified practices, so there is still some consideration for pods, for distancing and that, because ultimately what it's going to come down to is in football, your biggest risk is going to be when those athletes are in a scenario where they're breathing on each other. So you think of your linemen going at it and having those drills or working on receivers on defensive backs in coverage scenarios. That's where you might have to modify that end of it, but certainly doing a 5-on-0 kind of a drill or a 7-on-0 or an 11-on-0, now maybe you have a little bit more levity to make some considerations because you're not having that direct interaction back and forth.
All right, thanks, John.
I've got a few more questions here I can address. The first one, someone asked if face coverings are required in phase 2. We're not requiring face masks in any of these phases. What we said is that they should be considered acceptable in any of the phases. The other question was regarding cheerleading tryouts. Joe's going to put out some guidance to the cheer coaches and the ADs following this, specific to cheer and dance.
I also think, this is Joe, I also would encourage each school to sit down with their coaches as an athletic director, as a staff, and decide what your protocols are going to be, knowing that this is our recommendation. How far, do you stay tight-knit with that recommendation? And always understanding that if you have a stricter plan in place, or if you don't feel comfortable with this start date of June 1, based on your area and based on your exposure to it, you certainly can make adjustments to that.
Okay, I did have a couple other questions here that I've gotten before the meeting. The first was in terms of liability, and I think Chip had asked this at the beginning too. My understanding is that Congress is trying to address liability right now, and I think that they're going to have to address it in some form, or every business and everybody would be open to liability. So that's what I have right now. You'd have to check with your insurance providers in regards to liability at the moment. But what I've heard is that there's going to be some sort of precedent, some sort of tort law, something out there to address liability for COVID.
But just going through it with a couple of different insurance providers on that, if you are looking at purchasing insurance for some event that you have, just as a general advice to schools, my understanding is right now there is communicable disease language in a lot of the insurance event policies that you are able to buy, but starting on June 1st, that is going away. So if you do have some sort of school event or something, it may behoove you to hurry up and purchase that insurance in the next 3 days.
Yeah. In terms of a waiver, we've gotten an example waiver from Dissinger Reed, who does our catastrophic insurance. That's something I can perhaps share with you. But again, I would talk to your local insurance providers and see what they recommend. The tricky thing with all of this is that while we're doing this, there's a lot of other activities that are going on full bore. I know there's a wrestling tournament that just got scheduled around the Sioux Falls area with 250 kids that are going to be involved with spectators, and baseball is going on, and everything else is, the malls are open, the restaurants are open, everything is pretty much open. So we're trying to do the best we can to avoid, to do what we can to limit the spreading of this virus while the kids are in our care.
I've heard, this is Mo, I personally think in looking into it, the main thing is the chart that you have to document thermal temps and who was there and so forth and all that. And not only, one of the things has down adequate cleaning schedule, I'd also recommend having that documented, the cleaning schedule, off, gets cleaned, what gets cleaned, those types of things. And all of that kind of going back to liability, I think those things helping schools, member schools, so they're not negligent. And that'd be the part where I think you're getting hung up with, you're not doing everything that you possibly can, and showing that. That's something I think that they could get hung up on with negligence.
The only other thing I would maybe just add real quick too is as you have those discussions at the local level, that pre-workout contact screening absolutely needs to include everybody at that event, especially your coaches. Because I think one of the things talking with the medical professionals that we're maybe most concerned about is that a coach comes in and is the one that then shares it with the athletes and those kinds of things. So make sure as you have that discussion, it's not just we're taking that temperature and we're doing that screening of the kids coming in, but your coaches or any other individual that's there part of those workouts and those contacts.
John, if that is it possible for you to repeat about the first 4 sentences that you said, because we could not hear you.
Sure. So basically, just again, in that pre-workout contact screening that's in each of the 3 phases, make sure that includes your coaches and anybody else who's at the workouts, and not just the student athletes. So much of what we talk about, we think about scanning the kids and checking the kids as they come in, but I think a concern from the medical side, as much as anything, is those coaches that are going to interact with those kids need to be just held to that same standard. And you know what? If coach has a temperature, then that means workouts are canceled for that day. That's going to be something that we would implore you to do as part of that contact screening as well.
There's a question, is it okay to have the athletes help with the cleaning? Again, that would be a decision you would have to make locally. I I'm not sure what the answer would be to that. I would visit as an administrative staff and see what your comfort level would be with that. Yep.
I also think it'd be beneficial. You guys did a great job on this document, going through it one more time and seeing if there's some areas that need to be underlined or bolded. The one thing I can see confusion in is 10 people at a time. I know you have it spelled out there, but that's to include coaches. So really 9 athletes and 1 coach. Things like that, just going through they're all important, but the things that need to be kind of pointed out and made sure that are followed.
Sure.
Dan and John, either of you guys, I received because of our poor sound quality, I received a text wanting me to ask if you could explain again where high risk, moderate risk, why basketball doesn't fall into the high risk. And I'm guessing this isn't something you guys developed. You pulled it from the Olympic committee or whatever. But can you do that again, Dan, and explain how that basketball is considered moderate versus high?
Yeah, this was asked, that's where the NFHS put it. And they put it there because that's where the U.S. Olympic Committee had it. So we're following what the U.S. Olympics is doing. We're following what the NFHS is doing in terms of those categories. And there'd be nothing stopping you as a school district from considering basketball as a high-risk activity.
All right, thanks. I know you had said that earlier. We just lost it with the sound.
Yeah, and I think the differential there is that it's more intermittent contact than a wrestling or a football would be, and it's less intermittent face-to-face contact. So I think they consider it a less contact activity than a football or wrestling would be. But again, if a school wants to consider that a high-risk activity for the summer period, they're welcome to do so.
A couple of things I'd like maybe for consideration. I visited with Dan earlier in the week, and there's some other states that did this. And given, I think, the comment that the athletes have been away from activity other than on their own and maybe a few facilities in the state, the consideration of for a 1 year only, reducing the summer moratorium to July 3rd, 4th, and 5th. That's one thing. And then the end of our out of season, I know I've seen a couple colleges now that are doing some of their camps that last weekend in July, which overlaps the end of July into August 1st. So perhaps maybe extending that to August 3rd or 4th. Just a couple things for discussion, and I think that would be beneficial to the athletes in this certain situation that we're in. Obviously, it's not an every year thing.
Yeah, in terms of the moratorium and the end of season, I think we're open in terms of that. I think something we need to think about is that moratorium would give schools a chance to do a deep clean kind of in the middle of this, of their facilities. And as you start thinking about your coaches scheduling, particularly at the beginning of this, groups of 10 kids, they're going to be going, if they're trying to reach all their kids, they're going to be going a lot of the day, every day with groups of kids, and it might be a little break for your coaches. But on the other hand, I see where, our goal is to get them with their coaches as much as possible this summer. And I could also see the argument that if they're not with the coaches, they're going to be with the club coaches, and we'd rather have them with their high school coaches to prepare for the high school season that's coming up. So we're open to both of those things. If that's something the board wants to do, we'd support it. If the board doesn't want to go there, we'd support that as well. What we don't want to do is get into a habit of changing this moratorium every year. but this is a pretty atypical event that's going on. And I know several of our surrounding states have done both of these things as well.
I think there was a question in that chat.
Okay, there's a question here. If there's a case detected during one of the phases, does that close down activity for everything for a period of time? Do we move back a phase? And again, I think that would be situational. It would depend on how many people were in contact with it. If there's a case when you're in the phase 3 and you've got 50 people together, that's different than if they're working in a pod and you know, so I think there was no recommendations from the NFHS in regards to that. That would probably be something that I would visit with the Department of Health about, and it would be situational depending on what the actual situation is. Whether you just pause your activities, whether you move back from phase 2 to phase 1 or phase 3 back into phase 1, you know, I think that's going to be a decision that's made based on what the situation is.
Yeah, specific to that question, Jim, on the first page here, I think I rolled back to it on the screen share. That second bullet point under phases was one that we talked about pretty significantly in developing this, about that very question, about moving back a phase, about isolating, if it's a community member, if it's a kid in practice. So I think ultimately what it comes down to is determining your level of exposure of, has that kid only been working in groups or pods, or was it a family member? Kind of that contact tracing like Dan just said. But that we dressed it there in that second bullet on phases, but purposefully left it a little bit open-ended, just given that after you have those consultations, you'll have a little bit better handle on how to progress or regress your phases, given the specific scenario that we just couldn't possibly write for every different unique circumstance that might come up through this.
Hey Dan, this is Randy. Question. Mo talked about documenting documenting the screening, but also documenting the cleaning. Have they put out any documents on stuff like that, so we could have a form to follow those as well? Do you know, or is that something we need to make up on our own as well?
They haven't, but that's something we could put something out for that. Just a checklist that schools could use. So I guess what we're looking for, there's one more question here. Should our coaches be limited to athletes they are exposed to throughout phases? Example, one coach only interacts with certain kids, concern of possible cross-contamination. Yeah, a lot of that's depending on, you know, if you're a team that has 100 kids on your football team, you probably don't have 10 different football coaches to work with those groups of kids, and it's really going to depend on your coaching staff and the number of staff you have that are vulnerable. You know, I think that goes back to the coaches, you know, if they're working with multiple groups, making sure that they're doing the washing of hands in between each group, and participating in the cleaning and things like that as well. But I know that in some situations it's not possible to have a different coach with every group of 10 kids that's going to be coming in there. So I guess what we're looking for from the board would be action on these recommendations, and then if you have any action on the moratorium or the extending the time period into that first weekend in August, That's where we're at, unless there are other questions.
Knowing that we start practices in August as well.
Could the moratorium, this is Dan Aker, could the moratorium and the possible move in August be something we discussed in June meeting, June 11th, I think?
Yes, it could. Yep.
It's a great idea. It's a great idea, Dan. This is the first I've heard of that. So it'd be nice to have a chance to think that through.
Well, I think also we should probably have an agenda item, put that on an agenda if we're gonna make a motion second to change those.
Okay.
Great.
Yep, I think that's appropriate.
Any other discussion before we are looking for a motion to approve these guidance? I just want a clarification for myself now. This is just, these are guidelines with no penalties. It keeps kind of pretty much everybody on a, so to speak, level playing field, you know, between the haves and the have-nots that have access to private facilities to work out, because I guess, what is it, Sacred Heart, they've had 10 on, you know, 5-on-5 playing basketball and everything else, but these are just guidelines for our schools to take. It's not facilitating other family or parents taking their students to these private facilities, correct?
Correct. Yes, we have our out-of-season rules in terms of coaches and their participation in club teams and some of those other things, and those are still in place. But this document here is a recommendation. There's no penalty structure. There's no, you know, there's no oversight attached to it.
I think the biggest point, David, is we want you to follow these so we can get back to it on August 3rd.
Yeah.
If we don't follow these things and we don't do the right things, then we do put our fall sports further into jeopardy. And that's the ask or the implore today is, please do and consider these things and make it work at the local level, so we're not getting back together in late July or early August figuring out how many weeks of fall sports we're canceling and activities.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, this is Randy again. Have you guys, some of the discussion we had with our coaches is we trying to come up with a travel policy on kids traveling down out of state or traveling to hotspots in the state for camps or different things on their own. Do we allow those kids back into our own and how that works? Have you guys got any recommendations on that kind of stuff? What you guys would think would be appropriate? Because I know what we've kind of come up with and just wanted to see if we're in the same line.
Yeah, I mean, our hope is that the pods take care of that and that that pre-workout screening, and if they were at an area in a hotspot and they were potentially exposed to it, that they would mark that on their form when they come into the room. But again, a lot of that is self-policing, and a lot of that is, you know, we can't stop kids from going around the state and playing travel ball all summer, you know. So yes and no, and perhaps it's something you could add. I'm sending it out as the screening tool out as a Word document. So if you want something you want to add on there, maybe you add a question. Have you been to an area labeled as a hotspot, or have you been, you know, to a large camp in the last 2 weeks, or a large athletic event in the last 2 weeks? That's something you could add to your pre-screening questions if you wanted.
This is Mo. I know this was brought up a little bit ago, but so these are pertaining to our schools and our facilities. So if there's a team camp or 7-on-7 or something like that, those kids are allowed to go to that?
Yeah, that would be your decision as a school. If you're sending them as a school team to a team camp or something of that nature, that would be a decision you'd have to make as a school, depending on the nature of that camp and you know, the number of teams there, the extent of spread that's possible there, the activities they'll be doing there.
And maybe somewhere in the document to clarify that so they know they have that ability, schools.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Okay, if not, is there a motion to approve the guidance with some of the suggestions and recommendations given to the staff by the board?
So moved, Dan Aker.
Second, Soma.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, same sign.
Pull up the football advisory.
Okay, moving on to item number 4, consideration of next steps pertaining to football classification.
Okay. Yes. John is trying to pull the football minutes up here. What we wanted to do was to report back to you on the football advisory meeting that was requested by the board of directors at their April meeting. I had us pulling up here really quickly. Not quickly. Okay, so the football advisory met, and I'll just read towards the bottom here, and then I'm going to kick it over to John to kind of go through the ins and outs of that meeting. But essentially, the board had asked us to go back to the football advisory to tweak the 5-class proposal, to make some adjustments if necessary to the 5-class proposal that was brought to them through the ADs. And the football committee met and talked about that and a lot. And at the end, there was a motion to instead respond to the board of directors with a request to form a separate subcommittee to include 3 representatives from each group, which would be the AAA, AA coaches, the 11 AB coaches, the 9-man coaches, the principal superintendent and athletic director, and then invited representatives representing Native American schools and officials to reflect our current committee structure, to meet in August and November of 2020 to make a formal proposal for adoption by the January 2021 Board of Directors meeting. And that motion passed unanimously. And I'm going to have John sort of give a little bit more in-depth overview of that meeting to you.
Yeah, you know, as Dan said, I mean, that's ultimately the motion and the information that came out of there. Certainly after the board meeting some 5 weeks ago in the end of April, there was a lot of feedback that immediately went to the members on that committee, from coaches, from other administrators, etc. And given that range of feedback, I think basically the committee did not have a specific proposal, nor did they fully support or I don't want to say fully support, but nor did they just simply recommend back to you, well, just go with the one that we sent forward before. I think the idea was that with the enlarged committee, basically that you give them that direction again to 5 classes and go forward, or whatever the direction is, that would have a larger group that could then sell it to the membership, because I'm certain that each of you 9 board members also received a ton of feedback either prior to that April meeting or maybe even more so right after. So it was a lot of discussion. I think that, you know, as the liaison in the meeting, we asked, suggested, challenged, requested, whatever you want, some version of proposal. There just really wasn't any direct conversation on those proposals, whether it was the one that was passed or of the several that were kicked around of, well, maybe try this or try that. So I know that was certainly the direction of the board. I feel that was certainly the direction that that both Dr. Swartos and I took in the meeting, was trying to encourage action such as that. But ultimately, as neither he nor I have a vote in that meeting, or the ability to make motions or do anything, we were at somewhat the mercy of the advisory group, and that's the motion they ultimately left the meeting with. So I guess our take and coming back to you today is the ball is somewhat in your court as a board, as to responding to their idea of putting this committee together. The idea that we kind of cobbled together is not too dissimilar from when the dual championship was returned to wrestling. We put a committee together much in the same avenue of multiple stakeholders from each of those parties or each of those groups to represent their group, and then to turn around and be able to sell it back to their group to get the implementation of the duals back in, and that was successful. So I think that was somewhat the line of thinking here. But I think the most important thing maybe is the takeaway. Before this motion, this action was taken, was 2 things. Number one, nobody on that call, when the question was again asked, should we have 7 classes of football, went out of their way to say, yes, absolutely we should. It just wasn't there. So there's an agreement of reduction, and I think in the same breath, just not not that agreement on a plan, but then more so was, I feel that every person on that committee or in that meeting felt that let's not keep kicking the can down the road, even though ultimately that's maybe what that motion did, but to take some action and to get this addressed before the next classification cycle. So
yeah, so to me, I think the board has a few options here. The board can agree to this and accept this request to form this committee as requested. The board can agree to it and say, yes, you can have this committee, but we need it done prior to this timeline you're giving us, and we need this before our November meeting, or we need it before an earlier time than January, because that's when that's when we do our alignments, is January. And if they get together and they can't agree on anything, then we're in the same spot come January. Or the board can reject this request and go their own way. That's really up to the board in what they want to do with it. Or you could do something completely different. I don't want to back the board into a corner here either. But those are the options as I see them.
And I would just probably share one last thought real quick, if there's question or concern about precedent. As I understand it, 9 years ago when the AAA was voted in, that was done outside of the advisory and by the board. Modifications have certainly been done through the advisory, even with a less than favorable vote from the AD's group. So I think there isn't any unprecedented territory, if you will, on any of those things that Dan just spoke to, that within at least my 8 years in the office, all of those have been taken specific to classification. So just for what it's worth.
Dan and John, if we as a board decided to take this recommendation today, my question would be, who is choosing to be on the subcommittee? Who's going to be on that committee? My thoughts a little bit is we add more to get a bigger committee. It's almost like we have that many more options and more work that they're going to have to try to decipher through. So have you given thought if this would move forward with us today, who's going to be on that subcommittee and how are they going to be chosen?
Right now, they're voted on by the groups themselves, correct?
I think the discussion that we had at the advisory meeting was ultimately there was not an absolution of parameters put into place, but rather that you would hope that each of those specific groups would take into account geographic and school size concerns, if you will. So that, as my joke was that Kim Nelson, who's on there as the AAA coach, doesn't turn right back around and bring with him to the next meeting 2 other Sioux Falls coaches, and that's the 3 guys for that AA, AAA group. So I would say that ultimately you as a board or we as a staff have the hammer, if you will, as far as determining who's on it, because it is a separate subcommittee, but there was not an exact specific parameter provided or given. When we did the wrestling run, we basically tasked those advisory members with finding the 2 additional people of their group, and some that reached out and indicated interest in being part of that. And Dan maybe is familiar with that because he was one of the ones that came in as a superintendent that sat down on that committee, even though he was not on the advisory at that time.
This is Mo. I have some mixed feelings, and I've shared them in the past, but I'll share them again. Obviously we gave them a directive to come back with something in May, and that was not followed. And I echo what John said. Nobody wants 7, but nobody can agree upon what either 5 or 6, for that matter, looks like. And again, we could go whether it's November or January, and they still might not have a concrete answer. And whether it's now or a future board or down the road, it might be the board that needs to make a decision. And maybe that's what this group wants. So there's some clarity and some direction given, but. Even some of the people I spoke to or heard talk about 6 classes, the 9-man coaches are like, yeah, 6 is great, but they think it should be 3-11 and 3-9. And then when I hear some 11-man coaches say, oh yeah, 6 is great, they have the opinion that it should be 4 11-man and 2 9-man. So even those that think 5 isn't the answer but 6 is, they can't agree upon what 6 looks like. So whether it's now or in the future or after we make a decision, it might need to be a board that sets the number and leaves it up to the executive staff to either create a ratio or a set number per class. I don't know if I ever see a group, especially expanding a group, agreeing upon what this all looks like. Because in all fairness to everybody, and unless you're sitting on the board, everybody sees a proposal or 2 or 3 proposals, and the first thing they do is look at their school, and then look who's in their region and who they'll play, and how that'll hurt or benefit them. And that's not what this decision making is all about, and we'd like to say that doesn't happen, but we know that happens. Those are just some of my thoughts, and I just think at some point the board's going to have to make a decision and go with it, whether it's now or in the future. And if we get more input, great. I won't be on the board, but for you guys on the board right now and future members, I think it's going to have to be a board that gets something concrete here.
to the activity association staff, and I agree with Mo. There's a balance between trying to be responsive and as a board making decisions when they're tough decisions and committees or membership don't have a clear solution that's highly supported. So I know that's the challenge of being on a board. If we consider the recommendation, and I don't know right now whether we should or should not, do their timelines even work with August and November? What they're proposing, does that even work to put together something?
I guess my response would be this, Jerry, is quite frankly, I think, I'm not trying to be the broken record here, but we know that there's something that has to get addressed within our top 2 classes given where enrollments in future schools are coming in, and ultimately needs to be addressed by the January Board of Directors meeting of here's what we're doing in order to allow myself the time to do the regular season schedule and do the officiating schedules and have that all done before that first week of March. Much past that becomes certainly troublesome because as I'm sure you know and Bill and everybody at your school and any school knows is that football schedule is a key component in setting up your schedule for the coming year, whether that's setting up around homecoming or other events on your field and your facilities, and you kind of need to know that by that March timeframe to be able to get it done. So to me, that is the quote unquote drop dead date is going to be, we've got to have that direction in policy to the staff by the January Board of Directors meeting to give me that, 6-week time frame or whatever it is to try and put all that together.
Yeah, I don't know if that deadline is in fairness to you a good deadline. You have a job to do too.
As a staff, I think if we have this subcommittee set up, I think we would feel more comfortable with them having a deadline of November to come with the recommendation, so that if they get deadlocked and they can't do anything, then that still gives us a little bit of time to figure out what we're going to do before January. That's a goal.
Yeah.
Well, with that recommendation, wouldn't you have to have a first reading and second reading also?
Likely, yes. I mean, all of our rule changes have 2 readings, and our classifications have 2 readings when we do those.
I would agree, Dave. Generally, we do. The one thing that has changed for better or worse in the last, I want to say 7 years, is working on those regional alignments with Joe. We did away with classification and alignment being a first and second reading, because as you could ask any of your former fellow board members from 7 and 8 years ago, having to go through that reading twice and hear the arguments about that was very cumbersome to the board. So those 2 things, for that reason, as much as anything, have gone to 1. Policy change, yeah, probably 2, but it certainly is being read as a one-timer right now.
So if we do something today, is this like approve a 5-class system? Is this the second reading then, or will this be the first?
We would recommend that it would be a first reading, because the first reading of it wasn't passed. So if you're going to approve it, this would be a first reading to approve it. I don't know fundamentally what the actual rules are, but in terms of openness, our recommendation would be that it would be treated as a first reading.
Okay.
Would there be any reason that June, July, maybe August, that if this committee, if we took their ask and said, well, you've got the summer to have your committee come up with something, and if you don't, then, I guess I'm worried about pushing it up to the November timeline if we did allow this, and I don't know that we would allow this, but if we did, I'm just worried that we've kicked the can down the road so far that now we're really scrambling. And I'm just wondering if they think this is a good idea, is there any reason it couldn't be done over the next 3 months?
I think the only reason we talked about the time frame we did in the meeting, Jerry, was frankly just because of people still moving and changing jobs. You know, I mean, Coach Stathem's a perfect example, you know, going from Washington over to the AD position, so now we're going to have a new football. There's still a lot of those positions that have some turnover, and that's, I think, why there was a thought to wait until August, like kind of what we've done with those advisory appointments. If you recall, we moved those to August now for that same reason, because I think we had 2 years ago, we had two that got elected and then took a new job between you know, May when they got elected and then when they were going to serve. But I don't see any reason why it couldn't be done over the summer. No, that was just the rationale of the committee.
I think the other thought was that, you know, if you were to get it done in November and then we get our numbers from the DOE in early December for the next alignment period, and then be a better sense of how many 9-man teams are going to be, and that might be addressed depending on how many teams there are outside of this, and that's a big area of contention right now. Obviously, is the 9-man classes, but if we had, to me, if whether they had their recommendation ready for us in August or November, that still gives us a chance as a staff to look through it and to look at what numbers we get in December, to make a recommendation in January. And then of course we have our 2 readings of alignments in January and early March, like we do every alignment period.
Mo, we're just discussing at this time, so if I could have the floor. One of the main reasons that I voted to send this back to advisory was back in April, there seemed to be a large discrepancy between the feedback we were getting from the advisory when they met previously the first time, staff recommendations, membership vote at the SDHSAA conference, along with all the correspondence we got from member schools. And when Dr. Maher made that motion, I went along and voted yes for that, if for no other reason, to get it back in the hands of advisory to gather more information, because I did not feel that we could make an informed decision. And you're right, Mo, there comes time where a board just has to, you know, bite the bullet, make that decision. And if there's anything that came out of this second advisory, if you want to call it, meeting, at least from the 9-man standpoint, I believe it was done through a Survey Monkey. I don't know if that gives you a better idea of the feeling of member schools versus the SDHSAA conference, but it was very overwhelming against trying to put forth that 5-class system proposal the way it was set up, even more so over a period of couple months. So we're still gathering information, and ultimately I think what this board and the three staff members have to consider is we're elected. You guys are hired by the member districts, and the member districts of South Dakota is who we work for, and we need to get as much information as possible. It seems to me that the wrestling, like Dr. Krogstrand mentioned, that worked out, at least for the best right now. We don't know what the future of that dual tournament's going to hold, but they put together a task force, if you want to call it that, and going out and collecting and listening to input from member schools. And ultimately, I would not be in favor of right now just ramrodding something through without at least getting some more information. And if anything, this has brought it to the forefront, and maybe some of those member schools that were a little quiet back in March will speak up now. And I think there's probably some schools out there that might even be interested in revisiting that 6-man, and that's a wild card out there. We've talked about the wild card of the All Nations, where co-ops fit. What are we right now? 125 approximately, Dr. Krogstrand, for football teams in South Dakota?
That sounds correct, yeah. It's less than 130, I know that.
Okay, And I mean, if we really wanted to be draconian on this and drop, I don't want to say drop the hammer, but say, all right, here's 5 classes of football. You take 125 divided by 5, that's 25 in a class and call it good. I mean, that's kind of going to the other end of the extreme. Maybe what needs to be done is it does need to get some more information, and if the board is comfortable with putting something together with a recommendation from the what you would call the special advisory committee in November and put it forth, I don't know why we wouldn't look at that option and try to get more information on something as important as this.
I'm entirely fine with that. I just would like the future board to be prepared to make a decision if that information comes back blurred and not clear. They might need to make a decision that we're talking about today, but more input, yeah, that's fine. But
Mo, you might be spot on. It may come back as muddy as it is. It might.
Well, if you'd let me respond a bit, mainly to the comments Craig made. And I'm not sure that I don't agree with what Craig said, except for I wholeheartedly disagree with some of his methodology. To say that we're ramrodding something through is wholeheartedly incorrect. But we went through the process. We could have voted on this at the last meeting. And saying that we need to listen to our membership, I wouldn't impugn the motives of any board member thinking that they're not listening to the membership. But if listening to the membership means we're going to see what the membership votes on and then endorse that, I suggest we save the money of having a board of directors and only go with the school votes. There's no need for a board if all we're going to do is go by a popular vote of our member schools. I say that with full respect that we absolutely represent the member schools in our state. And you mentioned that you don't know why we wouldn't wait. And I would say, well, why we wouldn't wait and get more information. And I would say we did. That's exactly why we asked the advisory committee to give us more information. And even in as polite a way as they said, gave their answer to us, their answer was no. So I don't feel as though we would be ramrodding anything. I do feel as though, I'll speak for myself, I'm listening to the membership. And in terms of, I don't know why we wouldn't wait, I would say we have. And we are elected, and we are elected to make decisions, and we're elected to give the kids in South Dakota the best experience they can have. Now, the answer to that issue is not a clear-cut answer. There's no bright line that says this is best and this is not best. I wouldn't impugn the motives of any board member thinking that they're not listening to the membership or they're trying to ramrod this issue through. Having said all of that, I'm still not positive the best way to go, but I'm certainly not in a position where I'm going to ramrod anything through.
I would just say that I think the timeline for the meeting to gather the information and to come back with a recommendation was a little bit short. And given more time, I'd like to know what the other plans are out there. Other than the one the staff proposed, I've yet to see what the other plans are like. So maybe they come back with us with a couple of options. But at least I think I agree with Craig. They want to be heard, and I think we should afford them this time because you're going to live with this system for quite a while in the future.
I'm good with that. Thank you for all the comments. And I somewhat, maybe I've said this before in a meeting, but I somewhat linking this to the classification and regional alignment process, in which the executive staff takes care of that, and they put their map up on the screen with all the balloons and circles, and not everybody's happy with that, but that's part of their job and part of their duties. And to me, there's a lot of similarities in this process and that. So I'm fine whatever is decided, but I think listening is good. There's just a point where, like I mentioned before, where a board need to make a decision. So if there's not any other board members' comments, Brian Mosier had a comment. If you guys could appear, allow him to speak, I'd be fine with that.
I think he's able to unmute himself.
Yeah, you should be able to just unmute yourself, Coach Mosier, and go if you're still there.
Yep, I'm here. Thank you very much for just giving me the opportunity. And a lot of what I was going to say directly reflects exactly what Dr. Maher was discussing about, that I felt that time was properly given to us to come up with a plan. And I sat in on the last discussion of the last group of individuals that was given the task, and it is a very tough task for them to try to come up with a plan that does piece and fit every single school district, and it's not going to happen. I look back at when we brought in SODAC 16, I was not in favor of that. I voted against it, and I'd probably vote against it if it came back today. But what I do have to say is that when we went to that and the board finally approved it, as a school and peer, and I'm only speaking for peer, we jumped onto that and we took it in, and we don't go back and we don't complain about the decisions that you guys have to make as a board, because they are all very difficult decisions. And I only bring that up is because I don't believe that any group of any individuals, whether it's a group of 6 or a group of 16, is going to come up with a plan that's going to fit the state of South Dakota football. After that last meeting, when the decision was to ask to come back to you as a board, I actually was in conversations with several athletic directors that were frustrated that we are continuing to extend it, that actually wanted some decisions made at that time, and was in hope that those group of individuals could come up with a plan. There is several plans out there. I've seen up to probably 7 or 10 plans, different plans already, that as athletic directors, we've all had access to them. They've all been out on social media. They've been on emails, they've been all over, and we've been able to review them. Here, we could live with any one of them. It's not that we couldn't. But if you really want to look at fairness, there's one plan out there that is a proposal where there's 12 in the AA, I believe there's 16 in A, 35 in B, and the rest in the other 2 classes for a 5-class system, that is at max a 2.57 ADM ratio between classes. That is the only proposal out there, if you're looking at ADM in general, that is consistent to get all classes as even as possible for ADM, if that is your goal. And I know it's going to be a hard decision, but I'm just going to encourage you as a board that if to not go to another committee and to either accept the original proposal or encourage John and Dan to come up with a proposal that best fits us, because I believe my voice has been heard. I believe that every athletic director's voice has been heard and every coach's voice has been heard. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
I can give some reference to Aberdeen Central in the sense that our shortest road game is a 200-mile trip to Sioux Falls or to Rapid City, which is further. Those are our shortest road games, and we go by all our common ESD opponents and can't play them in football. And our board, I don't think can justify putting our kids on the road for 6 hours. And Sioux Falls, the crew is playing all their games within 30 minutes, or they're home in bed in 30 minutes. And like I said, that I know the classification that we are in, but then I would come back and say, then just divide it all up evenly. Just go divide the top 3 classes evenly and live with that. But the idea that locally, that's very hard for them to justify putting their athletes on the road that length of time.
John or Dan, do you have the proposal that came out of the AD conference handy?
We can pull it up. Give me just a minute and I'll pull it on the screen share, yeah.
Mo, while he puts that up and as we have a chance to look and go through that, is it possible we could get a 10-minute break?
Is it for chocolate or the bathroom?
I prefer not to say.
Yes, that's fine. We'll do a recess and be back at 11:43.
Thank you.
No 3 Musketeers for you, Brian. Sorry.
That sounds good to me.
Everybody? Oh, yeah. Just the one plug into the other.
High school sports offer more than the joy of competition. Studies show that student athletes are more likely to enjoy greater levels of achievement in other areas of their lives, including academics. In addition, high school sports help young people in South Dakota develop the discipline and confidence they need to be leaders in life, even as they unite communities like nothing else. High school sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
The South Dakota High School Activities Association Board of Directors meeting is currently in recess or executive session. Please stand by for continued live audio coverage.
Who do I play for? I play high school basketball for every baller who ever played a pickup game on a driveway, playground, or alley. Because we all share the same dream. I play for buzzer beaters, big-time boards, and burying rainmakers. I play high school basketball for the chance to put my hometown in South Dakota on the map by playing in a state championship.
Only 0.5% of all high school student athletes play basketball in college, but all 100% of them become adults. That's why playing basketball in their high school team is so important. High school athletes learn life lessons that help them grow up, lessons that can't be taught in the classroom and often aren't taught at home.
I play high school basketball because I love performing in front of a capacity crowd in my hometown gym.
This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association. They are role models and educators. Their work requires a great deal of time and energy for very little pay. Who are these unsung heroes?
Thanks, Coach.
Thanks, Coach.
The simple truth about education-based athletics in South Dakota is this: without a committed team of coaches and administrators, they just wouldn't be possible. School sports, they bring out the best in all of us. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
If an individual student athlete or team wins a high school state championship, it's an amazing thing. It's also just the icing on the cake. That's because young people in South Dakota who participate in education-based athletics are already winners. Studies show that win or lose, participation helps to impart skills they can use to enjoy greater success in other areas of their lives. School sports teach the benefits of teamwork, the value of self-motivation, and the importance of accountability. They also help to foster stronger work habits and higher levels of self-esteem. In other words, the true value of school sports can't be measured in terms of wins or losses. If an individual or team goes to state, it's an incredible accomplishment. But regardless of the outcome, today's student athletes are already destined to go far. School sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
The South Dakota High School Activities Association Board of Directors meeting is currently in recess or executive session. Please stand by for continued live audio coverage.
He worked out early, practiced late, and studied well into the night. The next day, he did it all over again.
She missed time hanging out and socializing with friends so she could make it on time to practices and games.
He became a top student and a confident leader, even as he helped his team win back-to-back conference titles.
She became a role model in her community, even as she led her team to an undefeated season.
And when they finished playing high school sports, what did they do next?
She graduated from college with honors and went to work for a successful company.
He attended graduate school and became a difference maker in his community.
Because that's what student athletes in South Dakota do. They use the skills they develop playing high school sports today
to do even bigger things in life tomorrow.
High school sports,
a winning part of a complete education.
This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
This is what matters. This is beyond X's and O's. This is the difference mutual respect makes. This is what character looks like. This is what defines us in South Dakota. This is sportsmanship. School sports, it's not the outcome that matters most, but the way the games are played. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
Who do I perform for? I perform for all the awesome composers whose music deserves to be heard.
I perform for all the stagehands who make sure I never miss a cue.
I perform for our high school choir director who taught me to breathe from the diaphragm and sing from the heart.
Speech, debate, theater, music. The performing arts teach valuable life lessons that typically aren't taught in the classroom. They help high school students learn leadership skills that prepare them to enjoy more satisfying, productive lives.
I perform for Mrs. Evans, my high school debate coach, who has helped me become more confident than I ever dreamed possible.
This message presented by South Dakota High School Activities and the high school in your community.
Hey, I've got a question for you. Who will you perform for?
The South Dakota High School Activities Association Board of Directors meeting is currently in recess or executive session. Please stand by for continued live audio coverage.
This may sound like a typical high school basketball game being played on a Friday night in South Dakota. In fact, it's a crash course in cooperation and teamwork. It's a test of dedication, determination, and drive. It's character development in action. If you think high school sports are only about competition, think about this. High school sports can play a critical role in a student's overall education. In fact, studies show that students who participate in school sports are more likely to enjoy greater levels of achievement in their academic lives. At the same time, playing sports helps teach lessons not covered in the classroom. Lessons like tolerance, respect for the rules, and the importance of supporting your community. High school sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the South Dakota High School Activities Association and the South Dakota Inter...
Good. Yeah, Mo, we're switched over whenever you want to start.
I think we'll just wait till 11:43 since in case some people walk away and.
Yep, that's fine.
It's 11:43, so do we have all our board members back? If so, we will reconvene.
I don't see David yet. There he is. Okay.
David's on?
Yes.
Okay, we last left off with Mr. Aker asking to see the proposal that was brought to us beforehand, so that is where we're at. So, Dan, I don't know if you have anything in addition to that, or if there's any discussion.
No, I can just run through it here quick. So the 5-class system that was proposed was Class 11 AA would be the 9 largest schools and O'Gorman High School. They play a 9-game schedule in the 18 postseason. Class 11A would be the next 16 largest schools. They play a 9-game schedule, 18 postseason. 11B would be the remaining schools with a male ADM of 56.001 and greater. Play an 8-game schedule, 16-team postseason. 9A would be the top half of 9-man teams, 8-game schedule, 16-team postseason. 9B would be the remaining 9-man teams, 8-game schedule, 16-team postseason.
Just a few comments, Mo. When I look at these AD totals, and I think a lot of the board members have kind of said this today, I think even with a new committee, getting a simple majority is going to be a task. I really do. Unless with the one caveat of keeping 3 classes of 9 men, then you have a fighting chance because of the number of schools. I'm a little bit, I didn't see the exact totals, but I heard it was overwhelming from the advisory that we asked to reconvene of the 9-man totals that came in that day. I'm confused about that because when I look at this, there's 18 schools that voted for it. I don't know if that Survey Monkey was to coaches. The coaches voted on that. This was the AD vote. And when you look at the bottom, 46 to 60, you know, and we talked about kicking the can down the road. I 100% agree. I just, with this issue and this topic, a simple majority to pass one of the proposals is a big enough task the way it is. And I'm curious where we sit. And I'm looking at this proposal, and I would even throw it out there right now. I might not even get a second, but I'm curious where the board's at to propose passing this proposal. And just to see where we're at.
Oh, I got a question for the board. I think it was Brian Mosier that mentioned that there were 6 or 7 other, I don't know if you call them unofficial proposals out there floating around. And I'm not sure how many schools have looked at that, and maybe John and Dan know the answer on this. So these other proposals were they discussed at the at advisory, or where are these other 6 or 7 different options at?
I bet I saw probably 12 to 15 different proposals before the second advisory meeting, and the advisory committee didn't discuss a single one of them.
And were they ever, do you know if, I mean, I've talked to a few smaller schools that have yet to see any of those, and nothing against Brian and his, not Brian Maher, but Brian Mosier and his comments earlier, but Mr. Mosier said that pretty much everybody has seen those. I have a feeling there's a lot of people that haven't, but I might be on an island here too, I don't know.
I think what Brian was referring to was the original proposal, the one that went to the board. A lot of the proposals that we got were when this got kicked back to advisory, there were several groups of coaches that met and developed their own proposals to send to the advisory to discuss when they met. And then when the advisory met, they didn't go through any of them. So I know like Dakota Valley, Bill from Dakota Valley had 7 proposals. And there were proposals, I know the 9-man group met, they came out with some ideas. The 11B met, they came out with an idea. The AAA, AA met, they came out with an idea. None of those were discussed when the advisory committee had received them, but they didn't discuss any of them when they met that second time.
Okay, thanks.
Mo, in response to the comments Dan made, I think that's interesting. I'm trying to figure out, you know, when we moved, this is Brian Maher, by the way, when we moved to have the advisory look at this again, really our options back in April were to either vote on the proposal in front of us, or the option we chose, which was to move it to advisory. Advisory chose to do nothing with this. I think it's back to us, as Dan said, to kind of say, this is what was put in front of us through the process. This isn't something we invented. This is something that came to us through the membership without the unanimous endorsement, certainly. But we do have a proposal in front of us. And I think Dan was making a really good point. Let democracy prevail. Let's see what it looks like. See what we think of this. And we can go from there. So Dan, I promise you, your motion would not die for lack of a second.
Although they didn't choose to do nothing, they chose to ask for more time.
They did not. They chose not to follow the directive from the board.
Yeah, but then they came back with an ask for time. Did they not? Yeah, they did. So.
This is Randy. I agree with Dan. I think it's this is a very tough discussion item, and I think in the end, I think it's going to be very difficult for people to come back with a solid answer. When they come back, they're going to come back with options, and we're going to have to choose between 3 or 4 different options. And I think we can put back into the same position we're in right now of what we have. And so I think it is tough. It's always good to get as much information as possible, and I think we've asked that. And I don't know whether we've received enough good information back to say that we shouldn't move forward either. And so I agree with Dan. I think it comes down to, we got a lot of different proposals once people saw that we were going to start thinking about moving forward with this proposal. which that's how it works. Until it affects you, then more proposals come out. And I think that the football advisory the first time did a good job of kind of going through those scenarios. I was a part of that meeting the second time here, the last Zoom meeting, and listened in. And yeah, I think that there's good sides to all of the different classifications of why they should or should not be. And in the end, I think we're going to come down to us making that decision in the end. And so I would think that we should move forward at least with checking on it today with the vote.
Mo, I'd be willing to make that motion to approve what came out of advisory, the one we're looking at.
Okay, you're willing to, or you are making it?
I am making that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to accept the original proposal from football advisory, with in mind that things were sent back for feedback or something else in May, and our directive was not followed up upon to our desire as a board, and instead they were asking for more time. So looking for a second if there is one.
This is Brian, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on this? Okay, no further discussion. Somebody back at the office, I'd like to do a roll call on this one.
Yes, I can. Brian Maher.
Yes.
Jerry Rasmussen.
No.
Mark Murphy.
No.
Dan Aker.
Yes.
Craig Cassins.
No.
Barry Mann. Randy Soma.
Yes.
David Plantine.
No.
Bo Rusing.
Yes.
I have 4 yeses, 4 noes.
So we'll see if Barry's on.
Is Barry not in the meeting?
He is. Barry, it appears I've unmuted you. If you're by your computer, can you try saying something to us? Let us know. I would report to you, Mo, that he's in the meeting. We've got a gray screen, we've got him unmuted, so he's here. I just don't know if we're having difficulties like we did. If you remember last month, he was voting in the chat box. Do you want us to, what you would like us to do as a chair, I guess would be my question.
I'd give him a call real quick, see what his status is, and if give him the opportunity to vote. If he is not available or unable to or whatever, then we go forward.
Yeah. I'm calling him quick. I'm going to step out here. I did not work to call him. It went to voicemail. I'm going to try one more thing here really quick. call the school.
Yep.
Can we email this vote question? Can we email this one?
I just got something in the chat box from that username, I believe, wanting to email as well.
I think the question is is that possible? And
I would just suggest that if Barry doesn't vote, we have our vote and it's 4-4.
Yes. Yeah.
I would not want an email, just
correct.
That would happen, but who knows if it's coming exactly from.
So we're trying the school really quick. Okay, we're unable to get a hold of him, Mo.
Okay, that leaves us with a 4-4 vote. Would you guys clarify for me if that's?
Does not pass. It needs majority.
Okay. So that motion does not pass with a 4-4 vote. That does leave us still with the item number 4 and the timeline for the super committee or whatever you want to call it, or what the next steps are for that matter.
So if we were to go that route, and I don't know that we will, perhaps we'll make some other decision, but from the staff or board members, would we leave it? I guess I'd be interested in what process would have to be in place for who is on the committee. Would we have staff appoint? Would we have the advisory committee? I thought I kind of heard both as possibilities. And are we asking for one proposal from them? I kind of wonder sometimes, you hear there's 20 proposals out there. If a proposal doesn't pass, I don't want to see all 20 in terms of, I think that's overwhelming as a board member, but I don't know what's all out there either. And could we consider the committee if we did something that they came back with, say, 3 proposals in rank order of their preference, not that the board in any way would take their number 1 or number 2 or number 3, but would we have others on the table to look at if, and I fully respect everyone's opinion on this, but we're not going to get clear consensus. I don't think that's going to happen, and I think it will end up being a board decision. And I do feel we did ask for proposals to come back, and for whatever the reasons were, and I'm not questioning the reasons, that didn't happen. So it kind of puts us in a tough spot. So I guess I don't know if the staff has ideas or if the board members do. If we went down this road, how would we make up the committee, and what directions would we give? I guess I'd be interested in maybe getting 3 proposals ranked order, and after hearing a little bit, maybe head that way, but possibly not. But I'm also curious how we decide who's on the committee.
This is John. I guess here would be a couple of thoughts for you. Is if the committee route is gone, I think that the 2 things that were really talked about in that committee meeting, as far as delineating who was on it, was consideration for geography. So, you know, out of those 3 representatives within the group, probably making sure that one of those is a West River representative. That they wouldn't be from same school district. So if you have a, you know, use Kim Nelson again as an example, Sioux Falls Roosevelt head coach on there, that we would probably not have a Sioux Falls athletic director or principal superintendent. Just that's kind of what jive with the, you know, the policy for putting the advisory committees together. I think those would pretty much be kind of the 2 parameters for discussion or for consideration on that. Fundamentally, I think what it comes down to is again, we're back to the same questions that I think we, or at least I as a staff, had some 7-8 months ago, that we know there needs to be at a minimum resolution of a classification that nobody else will play, or other schools said they will not play, or, you know, not having enough teams called to playoff, or whatever comes out of it. We've got to at least at a minimum resolve that. So whether that's then directing them rank order or something, some sort of recommendation, because obviously the fear is, as has been mentioned earlier on this meeting today, is that back to a committee. Well, what if the committee doesn't give you anything again? You know, then where do we go and what do we do? Because we still have to address those fundamental questions. But I guess to go back to the question, Jerry, would be is I think those parameters that we use to put the advisory committee together, with the caveat of, for the 3 9-man representatives, perhaps one of them needs to be a West River school on that, et cetera, et cetera. I think that would be pretty analogous to what we've done with others.
Yeah, and then to address sort of what we don't want, I guess my request, in addition to that, would be that we ask for a proposal at our November meeting, so that if it does come out and there's no consensus, that the staff has time to come up with a proposal prior to the January meeting.
Dr. Skordos, would it be appropriate possibly, if we went a committee route, to also charge the staff with having a proposal to bring forward in case the committee brings nothing forward again?
Well, I guess our hope would be that as a staff, we're able to work with the committee to come up with something with them. So I think right now, I think if we're going to do this, we need to set them up for success and give them a chance to actually do it.
It's possible that we let it go and let it run its natural course back through the system, correct?
Correct. We would likely have to make a staff proposal in January to the minimum deal with the potential of the being able to fill out a playoff field in 11AA if the enrollments do that.
But aside from that, there's potential that, if the committee doesn't come up with anything and then the board rejects what would be a staff proposal from us in January, that it would then go back to football advisory again and through the AD conference for the next go-round, which would be a year after next, because it's looking like our next alignment period will be 1 year. So yes, there is that potential.
And I would just again add the caveat, we will still as a board or as a staff need a decision and guidance given if we have 7 teams in a classification for an 8 playoff bracket, or alternatively, how we handle a situation where you have schools that are saying they will not under any circumstance play a school from that upper classification, knowing you got an odd number, something's got to give, because then we're not fair and equitable anymore. We're gonna have to before January at a minimum cross that bridge.
I don't know if this, go ahead.
If we have a school that does not want to play somebody that we schedule and do the schedules, I would think it'd either be a forfeit or they can go find their own opponent. Because otherwise you're retrofitting everybody to who they want, and they're dictating, they're either in or out. I'm not saying they need to be out the whole schedule, but they'll need to go find another game. Out of state, wherever. Just, they only get so many choices, that's my opinion.
And I don't disagree at all, Mo. I think the challenge is to pick on Sioux Falls Roosevelt as the largest school in our state. If they end up with 2 of those games, now all of a sudden Sioux Falls Roosevelt only gets to play 7 games because 2 teams said they're not coming. Is that really fair to Sioux Falls Roosevelt? Did we know that going in, that we put them in that position to be, challenged? I don't know. That's again, discussion that we've got to at least have that direction on. Say, here it is, guys.
Yeah. I think moving forward, we've got to have hope that we'll be able to address that with this committee, and if not with the committee as a staff and the board, that situation at the least in January.
But Dr. Krogstrand, hasn't that already occurred, the teams refusing to play up? You've already built that into the schedule as it sits now?
Yeah, the challenge becomes if we end up with 11 in the AAA, I've got to find a game for that 11th team every week. And if I've got multiple teams from the next division below that said they will not under any circumstances play somebody from the AAA, regardless of who that is, my hands are pretty tied as far as that, and now it dumps it onto some of the fellow AA teams that they've got to play 2 and 3, while a AA team might have to play no AAAs and play 2 or 3 A's. And then we've got a huge issue as far as fairness and equity there. Or we go, like Chairman Rusing said, or we go and here's your schedule, and I guess if you want to forfeit. But now we've also put that team that they're going to not play in a tough position of not getting a game on a Friday night.
And with all due respect to schools, if they choose not to have an opponent, the following year they can do their entire schedule on their own. I mean, we provide this schedule in the best interest of the whole state and member schools. In the other sports, you go out and do your own. So if that's what they want to do, they can do it.
I would make a motion to accept the request by the advisory committee to create a subcommittee that is geographically balanced and has no more than 1 representative per district, and would ask that the subcommittee come back with three proposals in ranked order of preference and delivered to the Activity Association staff by November 1st.
Gary, I understand where you're coming through with the three proposals, but I don't know if I want to see three. I don't know, we talked about getting a consensus. I don't know if we'll get a consensus on the board with three coming back. I prefer either, and then what's the directive going to be from us? Is it going to be stick with a 5 class coming to us? Is there possible 6, 1 5 class, 1 6 class? I don't know that. But I think even at our board level, to be honest, it's going to be hard to get that consensus, I think, with multiple ones coming to us.
I agree, Dan. Asking for 3 to me, it is symbolic of what we've been doing, and that is not coming up with an answer.
And I'm okay with that. If it doesn't get a second, I'm just trying to keep us moving, so I'm not in any way offended. Just trying to keep the conversation going.
Sorry, go ahead.
That was a motion, Jerry, you made?
It was, but again, if it...
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
What is the actual motion?
Yeah, would you read that, please?
I've got a motion by Jerry Rasmussen, second by Mark Murphy, to approve the request from advisory to create a subcommittee that is geographically balanced with no more than 1 member per district, to provide to the board of directors 3 proposals ranked by preference by November 1st, 2020.
Okay, there's motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? We just heard something from Mr. Akers, so on his concern about the number of proposals that would be in that motion.
Well, Jerry, would you possibly be willing to amend that motion to at least limit it to a possible 5 class and a possible 6 class, just one of each?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. What would be the right protocol to do that?
That I don't know.
I think you would just need to offer that, somebody would offer that amendment to the motion, and in a second, we'd vote on the amendment, and then potentially we'd vote on the motion as a whole then.
So I would offer to amend my motion to be 1 5 class proposal and 1 6 class proposal.
Okay.
Okay, that's an amended motion, so we need a second for that.
Aker would second it.
Okay, second by Aker. Now we're voting on
the
amendment.
Discuss it first or not?
Yeah.
Sure, Randy.
Okay.
I
think we already, so that tells me we already have a 5 class already there. So we're just looking for a 6 class now? Is that, I mean, are we going to consider this still a viable option or not? So that's why I'm saying, are they still going to come up with 2 more and we still have this as the 3rd option? That we can go back to this one, or is this the 5 class, they're going to come up with a 6 class one? That's my question.
In my mind, it's open. It's a 5 class and a 6 class, and they may bring the same 5 class, or perhaps they would bring a different one.
That's the way I understand it.
Jerry, this is Brian. If I can ask you for clarification of your amended motion. So sure. What we'll see is 2 proposals, not 3, given the amendment. 1 proposal will be a 5-man proposal. 1 proposal will be a 6-man proposal, and we're no longer doing a rank order.
Correct. Yes. And again, we'll just see where we go. We're just trying to move along so we can get some resolution to move forward. But that would be my thoughts. Yes.
Thank you.
And with that proposal, or with this, we would throw out the original one that we just voted on, so we would only have 2 and not 3. Is that correct?
To me, that'd be up to the committee.
they could bring that back as their 5-class proposal, or they could tweak that and send that to you as a 5-class proposal, and then they're bringing a 6-class. So you would have 2 proposals to look at. 1 5-class proposal, 1 6-class proposal.
And as a matter of procedure, if we want to see the 2 options, 1 5-man, 1 6-man, we would vote in favor of the amended motion. Would we have to vote on the original motion then and defeat it?
No, I would say that the point of order at this point would be we would move the amendment as favorable for the motion on the table, and then move the action now would be is acting yes that we're changing it from the 3 proposals to the 1 5 1 6, and then the second vote would be a motion of the 5 and the 6 as actually what we're taking action on.
Are you sure?
Clear as mud, I know.
To me, that's
You can do it both ways. We could just shoot down what he has and have him come up with a new one.
I think Brian is spot on that. I think you want to defeat that first one.
I believe for us to accept the amended motion, we need to vote on the amended motion, pass it if that's what we choose. And if we choose that that's the direction we want to go, we still need to then defeat the original motion, I believe.
I think
if we want to follow Robert's Rules of Order.
I think the intent here is that you're voting on changing that specific language within the original proposal, the 3-class to the 5-class, and then you're voting on the entire proposal with the geographically balanced, with the 1 per district, with the date on it, and then the 2 proposals instead of 3. So that, I know that's how it's done legislatively. If there's an amendment, you vote on the amended portion, and then you vote on the action as a whole. In the legislature, that's how they do it. But I think we use an amended version of Robert's Rules of Order here, and it would, I think either way would probably be acceptable.
Jerry.
Chairman needs to speak up on this one.
Yeah, Jerry, it's your motion. Would you like us to just amend your motion and vote on that?
So I'm not sure I'm clear either. Maybe it's best to feed everything, because I think our discussion has led us to maybe, I think it's getting muddy.
Jerry,
So
I think you can just rescind your original motion and we're back to square zero.
Jerry and Mark.
So I would ask to rescind my original motion.
Because we have a second.
Murph,
And Mark would have to rescind as well.
I will rescind my second.
Okay.
Thank you. Now we're clear. Jerry, go ahead with your new motion.
So I would make a motion that we accept the request by the advisory committee to create a subcommittee that is geographically balanced and has no more than 1 member per district. And we would ask the subcommittee to come back with 1 5-class proposal and 1 6-class proposal. And they would submit those to the South Dakota High School Activity Association staff by November 1st. And we're not saying what has to be the 5 or the 6-class proposal. It could be what we've seen, or it could be something new.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, motion by Craig, or excuse me, second by Craig. Any further discussion?
In terms of the committee, the makeup of the committee, are you you're tasking the staff here to address that? Aside from the who picks who's from the West River and the rest of the things, are you tasking us to work with our existing football advisory committee to put that together?
I believe that the existing advisory committee should definitely have some say, since we have a little bit of a precedent there with the dual wrestling, and it seemed to work in the past. Just a thought.
And I would like to have the staff involved in that as well. So it's not a good old buddies club grabbing whoever they want on the committee.
I agree, Mo. I think there should be both input from both factions there.
Hey.
Could we, if this motion passed, could we then make a motion as to how we want the subcommittee, not who, but the process? So we could formally say we want staff as involved with the advisory committee and selecting members?
I think as long as we're clear what the board wants, I don't know that we need a separate action item on that. We're comfortable with it.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, let's do a roll call on this one too as well, please.
Okay, Dr. Maher?
Yes.
Dr. Rasmussen?
Yes.
Mark Murphy?
Yes.
Dan Aker?
Yes.
Craig Cassens?
Yes.
Barry Mann? Dr. Soma?
Yes.
David Plantine?
Yes.
Mo Rusing?
Yes.
I have 8 yes, 0 no.
Motion has been passed, and brings us on to item number 5, adjournment, unless there's anything else to share with the board.
Dan, what are you thinking for the June meeting? Think we're going to get together and do another Zoom, or you don't know yet?
I'm not sure yet. I'll email the board here in the next couple of days to get their feedback on that.
Okay.
Make a motion to adjourn. Okay, motion by David to adjourn.
12:20.
Second.
Okay, there's a second. We are adjourned.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, guys.
And athletics are played with purpose and perspective. That place is your local high school. High school sports offer more than the joy of competition. Studies show